The processing of how Django works is incredibly important. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through and show you some examples of how this process actually works. Anytime you have a website, whether it be Amazon.com or one that you create, there are two parts. There is the request and there is the response. The request is what you type into the web browser. So if you type in, for example, in this fictional example, www.myserver.com, that is the request. That message, if you were, goes out to the internet. It is routed appropriately and it goes to a server. The server processes that in some way, determines exactly what information you need, and then responds with what is called a HTTP response. That is, in effect, what we're going to be doing for the rest of the semester. You're going to be typing in a request, and then your Django project is going to be generating the response. Everything that we do in views has to do with how and what response is going to be generated. And so that is the process. Now, I want to note, in the earlier video, I talked about patterns. And I want to make sure that you understand that a pattern is what occurs after the web server address. The web server in this case is myserver.com. What comes after it? Nothing. But in a particular website, every website has different patterns because they have different content that they want to actually serve up. So I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do this, and we're going to walk through a couple of examples that maybe are close to home, and that is University of Delaware. So I want you to create a folder, and I want you to call the folder UD_project. Maybe not there. Hang on, let me click on the right folder to do that. There we go. UD_project. And then I am, of course, going to go into, let me kill my web server here. And I'm going to clear this out. I've got a number of terminal windows going. Right click, say Open Integrated Terminal. And I'm encouraging you to please do follow along with me here. So we're going to create a Django project. So we'll say Django admin, and we'll call it UD. Start project, and we'll call it UD. And that generates our project. If you open this up, we're going to do and follow our convention, rename, and put root at the end. Now this is actually a functional project. Okay, you've typed run server, but what you see, of course, is the default web page that comes up, the Django rocket ship. What we're going to do is we're going to configure this so that it goes to a particular page and follows a particular pattern. It is what we're going to call a root call. I'm going to use this term occasionally. A root call is simply udel.edu or amazon.com, or there's nothing after it. It's just simply the server name. And so we're going to configure our web project to handle that. The urls.py file in any project is called the traffic cop. As I've mentioned to you in the earlier video, it is the traffic cop. It takes in the request and it determines which direction that request goes. And what it does is, in effect, it takes the request, uses the pattern that comes in, and maps it to a particular Django function. So to handle the request, what comes after the name of a server in a root call? Nothing. That's why it's a root call. So the pattern that we're going to be using is simply going to be the empty string. And then what we're going to do is we're going to map this to a particular function. Functions are always in a file called views. So we're going to say views dot, and let's call it go home. And then we always name our pattern, and we'll use this later in the semester. So I will call this home. Okay, we'll use this later in the semester when we get to templates. Now at this point, if I save this, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get an error. I don't want to do save as. Hang on. File, save all. There we go. And I will get an error. And the reason I get an error is that it's saying, look, there is no such thing as views, and that's because we need to create a views file. Now, by default, there is no view file. So we're going to create a folder. It's going to be in our UD default app. And so I'm going to right click and say new file, and we'll call it views.py. Now this is a Python file. This is a Python file. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to create a function, def, and what did we call it? Well, if you go back here, go home. In effect, what this command does, this path function does, is it says, if the pattern coming in is empty, call the function called go home that is in the views.py file. That's what that does. So let me go ahead and name this go home. And all Django functions take in a request. That's what you typed in is coming into the function. And sometimes it's useful to use that, by the way. Sometimes there's information that we can use from that. Then we're going to return, your function is going to return an HTTP response. Remember, request, response, request, response. When you type in Amazon.com, that's the request. The response is what gets sent back to your browser. So what this function is going to do now is send back to your browser what you want to see. So we're going to say return, and we're going to call something an HTTP response, which is what we're returning. And I'll send back a little HTML, and we'll say welcome home. And an H1, of course, is just simply a H1 first order heading, so it's going to be the biggest heading on the page. Now, if I save this again, I'm going to get some errors. The reason is this does not exist yet. Anything I used, I have to import, and so I'm going to say from Django.http. And again, how do you know this? Well, you just kind of have to know it. These things are you just kind of end up remembering them after a while. And again, if I say file, save as, save all, hopefully that clears up that error. Now this is just simply Django likes to have what are called doc strings. We're not going to worry about that. That's not really an error. So again, what do we have here? Let me walk you through here. We have a request coming in. The request is going to be the name of the server. It's a root call. That is, I'm asking for the home page, basically, for the organization. And so the request comes in, and what's the path? The path is empty because there is nothing there. There is nothing there. And that is http www.amazon.com/ nothing comes after the name of the server, so the path there is empty. We're going to call a function called views, and you'll notice again I'm getting an error here, and that's because I have to import the views. So I'm going to say from, and the folder, the file is in the same level as the urls.py file, which is where I am. So I can say dot, remember that's the current folder, dot is the current folder, from dot import views. And so what that does is it imports the views, and every view that I create from now on will automatically get imported, and you'll notice that the error goes away. So if I type in the name of request, and I have my web server running, of course, then this should work. So let's say Python manage.py run server. Okay, and I have to be in the right folder. So let's see, where am I here? I'm in the project. So CD and go to root, up arrow, up arrow, up arrow, run server. Okay. All right, now let's go over to my, type in the address, 127.0.0.1, and welcome home. So if you look at the page source here, well, you'll see this is exactly what I returned. This is the response that I returned. Now, what happens if we have another pattern? What happens if we have another pattern? So for example, UD has a registrar's office. You guys are probably familiar with that. What if we have another pattern? What if we want to do the registrar? Well, I can say, create another pattern here. And now let's type in the pattern registrar. And it's convention, by the way, to put a slash at the end. And so let's say, instead of saying go home, let's say go registrar. All right, and we're going to give it a name, and we'll call it registrar. Now this pattern is the home page, www. In this case, udel.edu. Again, the name of the server, Django doesn't care. The name of the server doesn't matter. So in this case, it's udel.edu/registrar/. That's the pattern here. If I say file, save all, it'll come back and give me an error because there is no such registrar pattern right now. We're going to make that. So we'll say copy. Let's go over to views, and we're going to create our pattern. Well, let me get it right. Maybe I'll just type it. There we go. Def go registrar. Again, it must have a request argument. So make sure you don't forget the request. Request, colon, and now I'm going to return, and instead of returning the home page, I am going to return, there we go, welcome to the registrar. Save. Now I'm going to flip over to my web servers running. It looks good. Again, don't worry about the migrations. They're not important right now. I go over, and again, if I refresh, you'll see I still get the welcome home message. But now if I type in the new pattern, like this, / welcome to the registrar. If you were wondering, by the way, the second slash is optional. Most web browsers will add it anyway. So that is how that works. I'm going to walk you through this one more time just to make sure you understand it, because this is incredibly important. The urls.py file is what we call the traffic cop. The traffic cop is what directs traffic given a certain request. Okay, so your project is sitting on a server somewhere. The request comes in. It says the name of the server, Amazon.com, udel.edu, whatever it is, doesn't matter, because again, Django ignores the name of the server. The path, if it's a root call, that is the home page, what comes in? It's an empty path, this right here. So what this line says is, if it's a root call, if there is nothing after the name of the server, execute the Python method called goHome. The goHome method comes in, and it returns an HTTP response, which is welcome home. That's what's displayed on the web page. If I type in the name of the server /registrar /, that maps to a different pattern. Okay, again, and sometimes I get these errors and I don't know why, because there is a go registrar pattern, but this will call, that pattern is registrar /. It calls the view go registrar. Go registrar is listed here. It returns welcome to the registrar. If you remember this right here, if I go back over now and I look at the page source, you'll see it is exactly what was returned. So this is how the traffic cop works, and this is at least the beginnings of how Django patterns work in the urls.py file. Hope this helps.